That's right. The Wednesday main show for MindMine TV is back after a 2-week hiatus. Thank you for joining us, whether you're listening/watching us on Twitch or listening to us on Podbean or even seeing some of our highlights up on YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an interesting 2 weeks of not doing the show, so it's so awesome to come back and be able to dive into some absolutely fantastic topics we have for you. It's been a roller coaster. I mean, you want to explain kind of what the 2 weeks have been like thus far?
So, first, I got sick, and it was sad. And I got sick in a way that I couldn't really speak without wheezing or coughing. So doing a talk show, as one might imagine, is a little rough. And I didn't want to subject any of you to that. So we took that week off. Then the following week, the internet decided to get sick in my stead and didn't actually want to work. So we had to wait for technicians, do that whole hubbubaloo of trying to get internet access. So while we were waiting for all of that to happen, we actually did do an IRL stream. So if you're not familiar with our Twitch channel, please feel free to visit twitch.tv/MindMineTV. And you'll be able to see the really fun IRL stream we did. We traveled around LA and showcased the amazing paradise-like weather that we have here. And talked about filmmaking, our histories, went down memory lane a little bit, and really just had a great conversation with our audience. So feel free to check it out. But alas, there was no actual talk show. So now we're back. Here we are. We're ready to go.
And we're ready. I mean, this has been a show that we're really passionate about and have been loving to do. And it's been something we've been wanting to do for the longest time now. So to have the 2 weeks away from it has been tough for sure. It's always a blast doing the game streams and everything else, but we love also being able to do this. So to be back here with you all is super exciting. So thank you for your patience while we were going through the ups and downs of health as well as technology. And also a big, huge shout out to those in chat so far. Thank you so much for joining us. And salutes to you, Vargalas Vet, for joining us. Thank you so much. And also to Jordan Shep. Thank you very much for being here today. We really do appreciate it.
And if this is your first show, we do try to get to the comments in chat. As we mentioned before, we do live stream this, but it is also a podcast that's available on Podbean. So if you do have a comment or question that we don't get to as we chit-chat, feel free to repost it in chat. We'll make sure to try to get to all of the commentary, but please do understand that sometimes we get really wrapped up in what we're talking about, and we may not get to it right away. But we do love talking with our audience. We've learned so much from all of your different unique points of view. We have listeners and viewers from literally all over the world. So it's been really fantastic to hear what you think of it. As we tell people, we bring a more of a Western culture kind of viewpoint because that's what we've grown up with. That's what we know. So we're really excited to hear other points of view as well.
Exactly. Like I always say about this show, what I love about it is the fact that, not always is the destination going to be clear. It's not always a black and white issue or subject. There is going to be a lot of gray area, and it's going to be very hard to figure out what is the best path to take or where will we end up. But the big thing is to start the discussions now and to be able to better understand the different pathways that could lead to different results for said topic or subject. It's important to talk about it now because, again, we can better prepare ourselves for something that may happen down the line, whether it's good or bad, and to just be able to better understand what's going on around us, and even more importantly, be able to better understand how we all think, opening up those bridges of communication. Even if it's to agree to disagree, at least we've gotten that far. Because too many times do we shut off different perspectives or ideas, or don't even realize that they exist. So if anything, we try to at least make those connections and at least highlight the different ways of thinking about specific subjects. And I think with these topics today, we're going to get a lot of that as well, which is super exciting. We really look forward to that.
And what will we be talking about today, you wonder? Let me tell you. First, we're going to discuss anxiety because we're all dealing with it and it sucks, right? Then we're going to talk about music and how actually your brain, depending on what kind of style of music you're, quote, better at, unquote, it actually potentially is determined by your brain. So that's kind of an interesting study there as well. We're going to also be talking about cosmetic surgery, because that's an interesting fad all around the world. That's kind of gaining speed.
But especially in one specific country, being South Korea.
And then lastly, we're going to talk about marketplace competition and what Microsoft is not doing for it. So stay tuned for that. All right, anxiety. In the US alone, there's anxiety disorders that affect 1 in 5 adults. And that's probably just what's reported, I would imagine. And there's, of course, some current therapies and current treatments, but some of them have significant drawbacks. Some of them are not as efficient as possible. And luckily, scientists are still studying ways to help progress this particular treatment focus a little bit better. So there was a study, it's currently in early stages, but scientists actually found specialized brain cells in mice that appear to control anxiety. So and an anxiety disorder, if you're not particularly familiar with it, it involves excessive worry that doesn't go away. And that's the disorders range from generalized anxiety disorder to panic disorder, social anxiety disorder. And you can certainly go online and read more in depth about it if you're not familiar with it. If you are familiar with it and have one yourself, you completely understand what I'm talking about. And some of the treatments, I think, focus a lot on either pharmaceutical help or certain behavioral based treatments as well. But what these scientists found is that there are cells in the hippocampus, which is the area of the brain that's actually known for anxiety as well as navigation, memory. There are some cells that are a little bit more active when the mice in this particular study were experiencing anxiety. And the way that they looked at this study is mice are afraid of open places. So they created a maze pathway for the mice that led to an open area. And then they monitored the brain activity at the bottom of the hippocampus of these mice to see which cells had more activity once they reached the open areas versus when they were in the maze where they felt a little safer. And they found that there were specific cells that became more active when they were induced to this kind of anxiety. And then they wanted to double check and make sure, because that alone doesn't prove that the cells are causing the anxious behavior. It just proves that there's activity that is potentially correlated to anxiety. So the team found a way to actually control the activity of these cells using a technique called optogenetics, which it's a biological technique that involves the use of light to actually control the cells in any living tissue, but typically neurons. And what happens is that they've been genetically modified to express light's sensitive ion channel. So they're able to use light to either induce more activity in the brain cells or to suppress it. And when they saw, their basic question, of course, was, if we turn down this activity in those particular brain cells, will the animals become less anxious when they're exposed to something that was already inducing anxiety in them. And what they found was that when they did down that activity in those brain cells, the mice became less anxious. So this is exciting news because the mice actually wanted to explore the maze, the open areas of the maze even more, right? Which was very different than their previous behavior where they're like, crap, maze, I'm shutting down. So this is exciting because it's a first step, right? They need to do a lot more research. Eventually they'll have to, figure out how this applies to humans, et cetera, et cetera. But this is exciting because if there's a way, there's a treatment that could happen where, you can use light to control your anxiety levels, that could be interesting. Again, these cells might just be part of an extended circuit that is part inside the brain. Maybe they're not necessarily the beginning of the train, as it were. Maybe they're in the middle of the train. Maybe they're at the end. But it's an exciting part. It's exciting information because they can now study that in more depth and do more experiments and really figure out what's going on. For example, like cells in the hippocampus communicate with another brain area called the hypothalamus, which tells mice to avoid when something is dangerous, right? So obviously, there's parts of this anxiety circuit, if you will, that can detect dangerous things, and that could be a trigger for the anxiety. So why is this important? Anxiety disorders are incredibly prevalent, right? And they, as one of the scientists in the study says, they tend to hit us in the prime working years of life. And our treatments are at best partially efficacious. So, these disorders manifest themselves when people are younger and really affect the way that they experience life, the way that they go about their daily lives. And that obviously has an impact for the rest of their life. So if we can find a treatment that is efficient, more efficient than what's out there right now, it will be great for us as individuals, for us as a society.
Well, and we've talked about this subject a lot in the past, too, where we've said that there's so much stimuli in the world today between technology, between just more people overall in different concentrated areas, that we are getting bombarded by information. And though having information regularly at our fingertips and readily at our fingertips is great to an extent, at the same time, it does cause a sort of overload. And what we've seen in our society from the past 10 years, even 5 years now, is the fact that we've seen more anxiety disorders, depression disorders, more mental issues overall because of this sort of overload of information, of notifications. Everything is trying to bide for our attention. And so we're being split in too many different ways. And our brains aren't meant for that. Even though technology and other elements of the world are evolving, we as individuals have not evolved quick enough to keep up with it all. And so that has caused a lot of issues. And if we are to survive and continue at the pace that we are, we do need to figure out ways to handle anxiety better. And as you mentioned, there are pharmaceuticals that you can take on. There are different behavioral therapies that you can also do, but they're not 100%. The issue with pharmaceuticals is the fact that they are a lot of times chemical based. Many doctors will say that specific brands are quote unquote dirty and aren't very clean solution for your body and for your brain chemistry to be taking those. Plus, with a lot of pharmaceuticals, they have horrible, and I mean horrible effects if you forget to take them, if you have to stop taking them for whatever reason. So going cold turkey, as the saying goes, has a really huge negative impact that can last for a month, even 2 months, that whole kind of withdrawal phase. And so there are a lot of issues with core pharmaceuticals that are out right now. Then, of course, with some of the behavioral therapies, some don't always work, and some actually have negative repercussions as well, because you're kind of retraining the way you think, but sometimes it doesn't always work, that retraining. It doesn't always kind of correlate to other aspects of the world around you. And so, it does have a negative impact. So to figure out a way to trigger cells to just kind of lessen or dampen the amount of anxiety being felt can be a good thing. And when we say anxiety, we're not talking about like, okay, I've got a college exam I have to take tomorrow, I'm super anxious. We're talking about moments where everything is fine, you can be at peace, there's nothing wrong, there's no external conflict, but internally there is a ton of conflict. You're constantly feeling anxious, you're constantly feeling like you need to move, like you need to do something, like basically all this energy is being bundled up inside of you for no apparent reason, and you start going into this kind of fight or flight situation when there's no obvious issues around you or dangers around you. And so what they're trying to say is they want to try to quell some of that anxiety, because natural anxiety can be good for us, right? It again, all these signs, pain, anxiety, depression, all help us to learn. It helps educate us, and in the long run, in a way, protects us, but only in healthy dosages and natural dosages. But when our bodies start to overreact and start to get to the point where we're getting stimulated by the neurons firing off constantly when they don't need to be, that's when it becomes an issue, and that's what they want to try to help quell a bit as best as possible.
And I would say, too, one of the, I think, obstacles that anxiety disorders generally face as well, and people who have them, is also the fact that it isn't like a physical wound that you can see, right? Nobody's bleeding from the arm. And so it's hard sometimes to be, I guess, believed when you're undergoing that type of anxiety, right? Like, how do you, it's hard to make somebody understand what you're going through, right? And I think it's amazing that there are still, that there's people out there working to improve that, because it's something that I think is hard to live with when, again, it doesn't appear that there's like physical symptoms, even though if you actually watch somebody who is undergoing, a panic attack or something like that, or they're in the throes of an anxiety hit, is that the right word? I don't even, they're in the throes of that disorder, they're undergoing it right then and there. You can tell, if you're paying attention to some of the physical signs, you can see that, their pupils are dilated, they might be breathing differently, their skin might be a little bit of a different color than their usual color, their behavior, of course, is going to be different. But in terms of something that is readily visible, I think to the majority of people, like a wound would be, like if someone shot you or someone, sliced you open, it's harder to say, hey, this is a problem and I need treatment for this. So I think it's wonderful to actually show that, no, there's internally something is going on, and now, in a way, there's even more proof. Not that there should be, but there is, if that makes sense.
Right.
Like it is the body sort of doing it to itself, and it also shows how powerful the mind truly is. I know everyone talks about your mind can both mitigate and enhance what might be happening to your body. And in this case, very, very specifically so. As they show in the study, when they limit the activity of these specific cells, whether they're at the beginning of the train circuit or the end or the middle, it does have an impact. It does change how the mice feel and experience their surroundings and themselves and it makes them act in a different way.
And also in chat, just like to welcome Ava to chat. Thank you so much for joining us today. Vargala's Vet says, I believe, but I'm probably wrong. I think the light cells came from jellyfish DNA. Interesting. Have to look more into that.
Yeah, if you're interested in optogenetics, look it up. I was intrigued myself when I first read about it.
And Vargala also says, yeah, it sucks to watch a loved one go through a panic attack because you just don't know what to do, right? You want to help, but at the same time, you're not sure what's actually helping or what's making the situation worse. And that can be really frustrating, especially when, again, you want the best for your loved one. And a lot of times what we tend to do, right, is when we protect, we go offensively against the thing that's harming our loved one. But wonder if it, in a sense, is them harming themselves in that sense. What are you supposed to do then? And that can be very frustrating because you don't want to get mad at them because that makes things even worse. And it's not their fault, right? It's their brain, it's their brain chemistry, these cells that are firing off. So what can you do? And, maybe this is a way of doing that. But again, with every positive, there is a negative. Now, with pharmaceuticals, for example, which we had mentioned previously, the whole point of pharmaceuticals is not to take away the negative feelings. It really is just to take away kind of emotions and feelings altogether based on how your neurons fire off in your brain. And so what you end up being is this kind of, in a way, emotional zombie to a point, depending on how strong the medication is, what type of medication, where you're just kind of in the middle. You're just kind of mellow. You don't feel major lows, which can be nice, but you're not also feeling major highs like you want to, like in the sense of joy, ecstasy, certain kinds of excitement. A lot of that is dampened down too. So it's like, yeah, okay, the positive effect is that it's getting rid of some of the negative emotions, or at least lessening them, but it's also stripping away some of the positive emotions too. And that's a problem that I hear from a ton of people who are on anxiety medication, who suffer from clinical anxiety or PTSD, is the fact they feel like they're an emotional zombie depending on their medication and the strength of it. And so, it'll be interesting to see how they figure out a way of kind of turning these cells on and off in a way that doesn't interrupt emotions overall, but does help dampen those emotions during those really low panic attack moments where you're in that fight or flight syndrome. But then again, also making sure that it doesn't impact when you need that fight or flight syndrome if you're, say, for instance, in some kind of natural catastrophe or a car crash or something else where that can help you actually survive through that moment. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of this and exactly how it will impact people, because we always have to think of both ends. It's always a double-edged sword with things like this. So it's like, okay, great, we're getting rid of the pain, but at the same time we sort of need that pain for certain situations. We don't want to get rid of it 100%. So what do we do? And it's going to be an interesting moral discussion at that point.
Yeah, I could see this going the way of, military applications, right? If you make people not anxious, not afraid to do things, you can have an interesting sort of military personnel, Mm-hmm. You can sort of have a super soldier, I guess. I've definitely seen movies like this, where, in a way, it is like a robot or some sort of AI where you can sort of turn on and off the feelings, as it were. And that's sort of like in one way, like in one direction. But yeah, we talk a lot about on our show, we talk a lot about the way that, all this technology, all this advancement, all this science, all of the things that we know, and all of the tools that are at our disposal, in a way, are just that. They're just tools, right? They're neutral by themselves in a fashion. It's what you do with that knowledge and what that tool and with that advancement, it's what you do with it that really determines how good things get and how bad things get. So, I think overall this is a positive for sure. And, it's interesting. If you think about, kids born centuries ago, right? and the doctor and like everybody else would look at it and be like, okay, they got 5 fingers on one hand, 5 fingers on the other, 10 toes, cool, they're healthy. Nowadays, there's so much, as Evan mentioned, there's so much going on in our world, and there's so many things that can go wrong with our bodies or, go awry, that it's no longer just you have, 10 fingers and 10 toes. Now there's so many other things that we can look at and say, okay, how can we make this person the healthiest that they can be? And what does it mean, right? What does it mean to be healthy? If the majority of people have anxiety disorders, that is the new norm. So is that unhealthy? Is that healthy? It's an interesting topic to think about, right? Because as we change our society by advancement, by science, by changing our culture, etc., we also have to think about what is the new norm, right? What is healthy? What is considered okay to live with? I mean, I don't want anxiety disorders to be the norm.
No, right.
But I feel like, at least in most Western high-paced societies, I feel like it is. Whether or not people admit that to themselves, whether it's reported, whether it's recorded, I think that with the overwhelming everything's that is headed our way, and especially now our children's way, it'll be interesting to see, how they grow up with this. What is the new norm? Now I think a lot of my generation certainly is sort of on the cusp of, well, we remember things before they got so overwhelming a little bit, but now we're caught in this kind of future flow of, well, now things are very different. But kids growing up right now, they're in it right now. They're in this, multiple devices, social media, AI. Constantly your attention is divided between 100 different things. And then you have a phone and you have an iPad, you have a computer, you have a this, you have a that. You have thousands of TV channels. When I was growing up, and I grew up in Romania, but we had 4 channels and they weren't always on. So, now the overwhelming entertainment that's even available out there, never mind everything else, it's overwhelming. And I don't know, I don't think I could have, I did not envy the kids of today. Let me put it that way. So it'll be interesting that the more of these types of studies and research is conducted, I think it's good, because we're only heading more in that direction of changing what the norm is, in ways that are a little harder than 10 fingers and 10 toes.
And Vergala says they would also drill holes in your head to release the demons. Yeah, back in the day.
Oh, God.
Trepanning and other ways and methodologies. So let's hope we've gotten past that. Let's hope we've gotten far beyond that. Though they still use leeches. So... Right.
What is that? Why would they ever... Anyways. Like, when did that even work? I don't understand that part either. All of these sort of what we consider barbaric healing techniques nowadays, back then, when did that even work for them to keep on doing it, right? Like, if you bleed somebody for hours, they're not going to get better. They don't ever get better. So why would they keep doing it? It just boggles my mind, but it's another rant for another show.
And welcome Steffi Roth to chat. Steffi says, some people are full bore into the hormone philosophy since they affect our bodies in many ways, and that if one is off balance, it affects everything. Like, the body does not know how to handle the amounts of estrogen and testosterone in the body. My levels resemble that of a 90-year-old woman, apparently. It's scary. Yeah, it's amazing what our bodies do and what they go through, and, what you can experience. I know that I've had doctors say, oh, that seems weird. We don't see that in someone until they're in their 60s or 40s, or, it's crazy that we're starting to almost age quicker in a way, yet we're living longer as well when you look at everything. So our bodies are going through a lot, and if there are effective ways that do not mess with our brain chemistry or with our overall health, that can help with that and help us kind of evolve in the way we need, great. But I think also to a point, though, we need to also make sure to give ourselves just more time away from things. Take more vacations, especially in the U.S. There are so many people that work 12, 16 hours a day, especially because of technology. Technology makes it more efficient, but now you're expected to be more readily available when needed. And so we're also working more. We're also never pulling away from our jobs and taking a mental break, even a 15-minute break, like a nap or meditation or listening to music or doing a creative project, learning to paint for a half an hour, whatever it may be. Bob Ross the hell out of it. But, we don't do enough of that for ourselves because we're just trying to make ourselves even busier now that we've technically become, quote unquote, more efficient. So we have technically, in a way, more time when it never feels like we have more time. We actually don't have enough time. And so I think if we start doing that for ourselves as well, that would be hugely beneficial and more people would be healthier, at least within the US. And I think there would be less need for said pharmaceuticals, and at least these gene therapies would be on a minimal rather than, having it done by everyone, where you're all getting your cells kind of reworked in a way to handle anxiety better.
We just need to do what Gattaca did. We just need to, pick the genes that we want for our children, and then we just have perfect children. Everyone's happy and wonderful, and people live wonderful, fulfilling lives. Right? Right. I love science fiction. It's great. Speaking of brains and music, actually, it turns out that the brains of jazz and classical musicians work a little bit differently. Now, obviously, the music styles are different, so okay, I can see why, right? But if they're playing the same instrument, like the piano, and they're musicians, I mean, they already are like 3 tiers up above what I can do, and they can at least read, music the way that I can't, and play it the way that I can't. But it turns out that there's even differences between how their brains work. There was a study published by the Max Planck Institute for Human Cognitive and Brain Sciences, who also made this discovery, that the brain activity of jazz musicians is substantially different from that of classical musicians, even when they're playing the same piece of music on the same instrument. It's incredible. This research, of course, can help explain, too, why musicians do tend to excel in one or the other style and not in both. I don't know of any jazz classical musicians. If they're out there, let me know. But they do tend to be both drawn to one type of music and also excel in it. Now, in the study, what they did is they outlined 2 steps in playing the piano. The what the pianist was going to play, as in the keys that they're pressing. Mm-hmm. And the how they were going to play it, as in which fingers they should use, right? Because in theory, you can press the same key with any of your 10 fingers that you have. And what the both groups, so they studied 30 professional pianists. Half of them were jazz and half of them focused on classical. And both groups are shown a hand playing a sequence of chords on a screen. Now, the sequence was scattered with mistakes, both in harmonies and finger placement. And then the pianist had to imitate the hand movements and react to the irregularities while their brain signals were being recorded because they had sensors on their head. So what they found was that the jazz pianists focused on the what. They were always prepared to improvise and adapt the notes that they were playing. And the classical pianists focused on the how. They were focusing more on technique, the personal expression that they added to the piece. And so the classical pianists performed better when it came to following unusual finger placement. Like their brains basically showed more awareness of finger placement and made fewer errors when they were playing, because they were able to focus on the how, which is which fingers they should use. The jazz pianist brains actually had more of a neural flexibility when they were playing harmonies, because they began replanning sooner than the classical pianists, because they were focusing on the what. So the keys that they were pressing, they could improvise and adapt to the notes that were irregular faster than the classical pianists. So obviously the study also concluded that, switching between those two types of music styles as a musician is a challenge. It can be a challenge, right? Even for musicians who have decades of experience, because their brains are essentially, for lack of a better term, wired differently for how they play the music. Now, these people play obviously the same instrument. It was the piano, right? So you can take out the confounding variable of like, oh, well, they're playing different instruments. No, same instrument, right? They could even have the same years of experience, so you could say, oh, maybe a new person, they've only been playing the piano for a year, this person's been playing for 10 years, and it didn't matter. Same level of experience, same instrument. And
they viewed the same videos too. So like they watched the videos to show the finger placement of what song was being played and how to play it. And so everything was thoroughly consistent for both tests.
Right. So some questions here, right? Now, is it that their brain already works in a way that is more efficient for jazz versus classical, or vice versa? Or is it that their training, once they started down the pathway of that particular music style, helped to rework how their brain functioned when it came to music?
Kind of like what came first, the chicken or the egg?
Exactly. And the other thing to take away from here that we like to discuss is, in what other situations could this be true where, how does it help us understand better as individuals? Is it our training? Is it our brain being sort of wired more towards one way or the other? How does that help understand when we communicate with each other, when we work with each other? And realize that maybe it isn't, oh, well, it's a piano and you have 10 years of experience, why can't you do this? But rather, well, my brain is trained a particular way. And we do know, of course, that, children learn faster and easier different things than adults who are already learning something in a particular way, like language, for example, right? Language comes a lot easier to younger children because their brains aren't already sort of wired toward a specific language set already, right? And this, of course, expands to all sorts of other things that you do, other activities. I think it's fascinating. Music to me, again, it's already something my brain is not wired to do. But I look even at graphic designers, right? If you were trained, let's say, to first draw with a pencil, right? And now as we move into the era of digital graphic design, tablets have been a very useful tool for people who draw first on a tablet as if they had a pencil and a paper, and then are able to transform that into a digital graphic design. But then those of graphic designers that learned first to draw digitally, right, with the help with computers, whether it's CAD or Photoshop or any of those things, it might be harder for them to then pick up a pencil and a paper and try to draw that way because they're used to, let's say, Illustrator, using the pen to create their shapes, and that helps them create a circle or something like that. It's interesting because, you look at, let's say, digital graphic design, and people could potentially come out with the same result, just like with these musicians, a wonderful piece of music. But how they get there is different.
And we've seen, if you will, quote unquote, studies like this in the past, not so specific to the different music genres and how they think differently. but just how we review society overall. There's been plenty of times where people have been put in separate rooms told to draw something very specific, and the drawings look very different based on their past experiences, based on how they see the world. And so it's interesting to see a study like this where, again, everything is the same, but the style of music, so the way they use their brain is very different. So in a way, they're communicating the same way in the sense of using this musical language, but how they kind of, the style of communication is different, or how they adapt with this kind of quote-unquote language or music is different. And I think it's really eye-opening it should be, at least for many people, when we all try to play, Monday night quarterback from the couch, especially when we're like, oh, why didn't you see that? Or isn't it so easy to see this or that? Or this should have been easy for you. When overall, it might not be, because of just how their brain is wired. What they're personally working with over what is obvious to you, because that's just what you're working with. And so it's very interesting to see this, and then to also find out that with, for instance, jazz musicians, they were just more flexible. They had more kind of neuroplasticity when it came to adapting and changing the song on the fly, in comparison to classical, who, they could just basically to a T just nail it. They just looked at what was given to them, and then they gave it right back. Whereas, and again, one isn't better than the other in this case. It just shows one learned how to adapt one way, and one learned to just perform at a specific level, or to adapt in another way, in a way. So it's all just super intriguing, and again, can be then carried on to many other facets of life, not just to music, but to how we view the world overall, how an artist can paint over another one, and so on and so forth.
And it actually, the types of music styles could also be an explanation of why the jazz musicians were better at adapting quicker than the classical, right? Because with classical, you don't really remix that, you kind of, you're going to play Beethoven's pieces the same way all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So all you can do is, add the flair of like where and which finger is pressing, but it's always going to be the same keys. As opposed to, let's say, something like jazz, where I'm imagining, and again, I know very little about jazz here, but it's got a lot more on the fly, right? Like it's sort of like what moves you, maybe, and add a little bit of flair here and a little flair there, but it's with notes as opposed to which fingers you're using.
Yeah, I always felt like, in a way, when listening to jazz, especially when you just hear a pianist, for example, or a saxophone player just kind of improving, it becomes more like, I would say, not abstract, more like modern dance. Whereas classical music is more of like ballet. There are certain forms that you should not break. There are certain positions and carries that you do. Whereas with modern, there is a lot more freedom. There's less kind of restrictions. And that, again, one doesn't mean one is better than the other, or that one is bad and one isn't. Right. They're just different, and just different perspectives of how you view the world, how you view maybe how to portray a specific emotion or storyline. Sometimes it needs more kind of structure. Sometimes it needs more fluidity. It really just depends on how you want to tell that story.
That's a really good point. And to go back to your earlier point as well of, how does this, how does this go, flow into other aspects of our lives, right? Whether it's really trying to understand where, the other person that you're communicating with is coming from. How is their brain wired? What are they used to? And really trying to find more of the common ground. The fact that, okay, they're jazz pianists or classical pianists. The point of the fact, though, is that they have something in common. That's music. And that they can both play the piano, and that they can both read music and enjoy it in that certain way that people who are not musicians can't, right? And I think our society, we put a lot of stock into labels and like groups and like, okay, you're this and I'm this, as opposed to really trying to figure out, well, what is it that brings us together? What are the commonalities? What are the things that are similar between us versus the differences? Now, obviously, understanding the differences is key in trying to work together, and empathy and all of that stuff. But it's also, it can also lead to, as we talked in one of our previous episodes, fearing the other and like, oh, you're over there and I'm over here, right? And it can lead to people saying or trying to categorize something as being better than the other thing. And it's true. It's like there's no better this or better that in a lot of situations. It's just, it's different, right? It's a different way of looking at the world. It's a different way of experiencing it. It's a different way of interacting with it. And I think we should really just spend more time figuring out what makes us the same. So, we have 2 cats, and same time every day, they both go nap in the sun, right? And they both are hungry at the same time. And they both do a lot of activities at the same time. They both groom themselves at the same time of the day. It's amazing. Like, you watch them and you're like, wow, they're like the same thing. But their personalities, so very different, right? One is loud and aggressive and follows you around like she's a dog, and it's awesome. The other one's like, oh, you're in the room, I'm leaving, go away. And kind of grumpy, but like knows when you're sad and comes by your side. And one could look at them and say, and they hate each other. And they hiss at each other. And it's interesting because then I look at them and they both fall asleep at the same time. They both like sunny places. They both like places that are high. Like, they have so much more in common with each other than differences. But for some reason, they don't like each other. and I kind of want to just sit them down and be like, listen up. You're both cats. You both leave fur everywhere. You're both very demanding for food. But that's where you've got a lot more in common than you know.
Well, and to go back to the musicians too, this study does not say that people then just can't play jazz music if they're a classically trained pianist and
right.
vice versa. Just to clarify that, because many people do cross genres. But what it's saying is that the styling for one or the other seems to come easier based on the training and based on sort of the neuroplasticity and how quickly you can just kind of freestyle in comparison to how well you follow commands or specific prompts. And so one just becomes easier than the other. But we've all come across kind of crossovers too, where people play a classical piece, but that happens to be jazz, for example. And I want to play a little bit of one, for example, of Für Elise, but this is with jazz piano. So I want you to listen to a little bit of it to give you a sense that, again, it's not just about the fact that you can't cross genres or anything, or that you can't play one and the other, but the fact that just sometimes it's easier for an individual based on what they have with them, the kind of baggage they're carrying with them, to do one over the other. So here we go. And this is Bethany Brinton, who's doing a jazz rendition of Für Elise. So as you can hear with the piece, again, we went to that kind of more structure, classical, and even for us who are very familiar with that song, to hear it, we go, okay, this feels natural. And then all of a sudden that break, and that's what they're talking about, as a little bit more of that adaptation or flair or freestyle, where all of a sudden they change maybe the number of beats, the number of keystrokes happening, or maybe the notes went from a flat to a sharp to a flat, just to give it a little bit different edge to it. And so it was very clear in there about that kind of flexibility to adapt, and that's what they're talking about. When you hear that, that's what they came across during this study, is when these jazz musicians saw that, okay, this note was not done correctly, or was done with a weird kind of fingering. Okay, I'm just going to adapt it because I know how to get to the next point. So instead of going from, A to B, they went A, took a detour, and then got to B because they knew where they had to end up. So it was just kind of saving it and pulling it in to where they need to end up for the next bit. It's kind of like what happens with acting. When you see actors who are very good at improv, a lot of times you'll forget your lines on stage or even in front of the camera. And so what happens is actors who are just more well-versed in improv know how to keep the story going. They just kind of take a longer route, or sometimes a shorter route, because they know how to get to their next cue, or the end of line to cue their partner, their scene partner. And so that happens a lot too. So honestly, I would love to also see a study like this for actors who are trained more Shakespearean, less maybe in improv, and then more so in those who just do purely improv, to see how they handle a script and how they kind of carry that story. Because I think there's some similarities here with that as well.
Yes, no, I want to see that study too. I was just going to say, I know some actors are better at improv and they're actually not so great at memorizing script line for line. But when something happens on stage that is out of the ordinary, they can deal with it better, as opposed to somebody who, like myself, I am much more, okay, I know the script, I can memorize this, no problem. Something deviates and I'm like, shit. I have a lot harder time catching up and like trying to fix it as well. And also, hello, Fused Fury. My attempts to do music spawns the minions of hell. Yeah, I'm definitely not I can tell a good song from a bad song, but I can't make it. I can't make that music happen.
Yeah, and we've been talking, of course, about how the brain changes, whether it's through cells that kind of cause anxiety, or with the controlling of those cells could quell anxiety, to also the different changes in how the brain adapts to musicians. But what about the human face? What about adapting the human face, sculpting the human face, changing the human face into something different? And, we came across this article from NPR.org that talks about, in Seoul, a plastic surgery capital, residents frown on ads for cosmetic procedure. Now, for those who are not aware, Seoul, South Korea, especially around Gangnam, around the Han River, is one of the biggest, or I should say the areas with the biggest cosmetic surgery industry in the world. People actually come from Japan and China specifically, but from all over the world to South Korea to get cosmetic surgery done. It says that you'll see patients walking around constantly wearing nose guards and bandages from facial fix-ups, and there are high-rises all over South Korea, especially in this one district, that have cosmetic surgery clinics on almost every single floor.
Whew.
Almost every single one.
Damn.
Again, we're in LA. We know about plenty of places where they do cosmetic surgery, laser hair removal, you name it. But amplify
I just drove by
that.
like 5 of them.
That's right. But amplify that by like 100 and you have South Korea. You'll see massive ads everywhere, such as the one here. If you're watching us on Twitch, you'll see ads just like this. Going through, talking about all the different locations like bkhospital.com, where you can get plastic surgery done. Of course, they show the same kind of women with the same look overall. And it's crazy because 1 in 3 South Korean women between the ages of 19 and 29 are getting work done. They're getting some sort of cosmetic surgery. And they also have the highest per capita rate of cosmetic surgery, as previously mentioned. And the bulk of patients seem to be women, and the most popular surgeries actually are eyelid procedures, which are a lot of what these ads are pushing. And I guess, evidently, the kind of natural look that you'll see in a lot of these images that South Koreans kind of praise, or at least a large group of them do, currently are ones where you have ivory skin, big round eyes with kind of the Western-looking double eyelid, and a V-line jaw. And, you know, what's also interesting is the fact that the government is all about it. They're like, okay, we have an industry here. We're making money. We're bringing people into the country. So we're going to support this as much as possible. And you also have the K-pop industry, which if you've ever been to a Korean restaurant, you're very familiar with. They're all about it too, right? Because it's all about looks. It's all about what you see. And so a lot of the K-pop people are getting this work done, or they're promoting a very specific look that not everyone has. So people are trying to achieve that. And what's interesting, though, is that people are starting to rise up against this. Many people are getting frustrated because they feel like this objectifies and commercializes women. This brings out a certain kind of conformity. So basically, you know, they're getting tired of being told this is what you're supposed to look like, and you don't look like this yet. Because a lot of these ads really try to hit on the fact of, you know, being one of the crowd, you know, being able to join in and look like the way you're supposed to, like everyone else. And there are a lot of these pressures being put on people, and especially women in South Korea, that you have to look a certain way. Otherwise, you don't fit in. You know, you'll basically get shamed in a way. And so it's rough. And it's rough because of the fact that you have such big industries like the K-pop industry and like the government backing it. It becomes an uphill battle for a lot of these people who are trying to fight against it. Now, there has been, though, some, I guess, progression toward or a backlash even further toward these ads. And that is that the Metro, which is one of the biggest transportation companies there in South Korea, basically you take the Metro to get anywhere, they're starting to phase out these ads. Now, not all ads will be fully phased out of the Metro until 2022 due to current agreements, but they are starting to phase them out and will no longer start accepting them because they're getting such a negative response to them. And they have said, too, that they also do feel like this is kind of over commercialization against women, and that this does put a negative connotation onto not only them, but also onto women overall, and that they don't want to have anything to do with it. So they will be phasing that out. Now, what's also interesting, though, is that with this backlash, there's also some women who say that they support it. Many of the women say that everyone wants to be prettier, and now they have the ability to do so. So you have this one group who says, well, hey, I have the option to look the way I want to, or what they think they want to. But then you have another group says, no, I want to be me. I don't want to be part of this kind of conformity. I don't want to be objectified and commercialized. And I don't want to have to be shamed for not being born looking like a certain way or an ideal that's currently in fashion now. Which, again, as we all know, the looks change over time. You look at the 1700s, you look at then the 1800s, you look at like the 1920s, the 1960s, you look at now. Those styles and what was appropriate have drastically changed. Sometimes you get some throwbacks, right? But for the most part, they have drastically changed. And so they're saying, well, it's not even worth it. Why change now when the style and the expectation of what I'm supposed to look like will change anyway?
Yeah, there's always been a pressure on women especially, but I think all people to look a certain way. And nowadays, it's just easier to broadcast that message out, right? Because you can put ads wherever you want if you're a business. You can do things online. There's social media platforms, right? Like, it's everywhere. As opposed to a few years ago, a few decades ago, a few centuries ago, where maybe you didn't see it, it wasn't spewing out at your eyes as often, right? But now the pressures are not only higher, they're just everywhere. And I also think because we do have this technological advancement of being able to surgerize yourself to look however you want, right now, it's also a matter of, not only do you have the pressure to look a certain way, but it's like, even if before you couldn't, right? Like, how am I going to get my jaw to go into a V back, in the Middle Ages? I wasn't going to take a hammer to it and beat it, right? But now it's easy. It's like, just pay some money to somebody and they can do it for you. No problem. Why aren't you doing it? Right now it's like, you don't have an excuse anymore. And it's also cultural, of course, right? Because there was, and I don't know the name of the tribe or the area, but there is a tribe where women had to make their necks longer, right? And so they had all these rings on their necks, and over time, they would be able to actually change the way their necks looked. And I remember looking at that, and I was like, why does anyone think that that's pretty? That seems horrible for your general well-being. Like, you shouldn't be doing that to your body.
China was notorious for foot binding.
Yes, right? So, cosmetic surgery, in a sense, has been around since the beginning of time. But right now, it's getting to the point where it's so much more prevalent, and if you don't want to see it, it's just getting harder to not see it. And we're all human beings, right? The more that we are exposed to something, the more we're going to have a harder time ignoring it, right? Because that's how advertising works, right? You keep seeing something, eventually your subconscious can be like, man, I really do want a Big Mac right now. And because you've just been seeing that same ad over and over again. I know that when I'm on Twitch and I'm not signed in, I see all the same ad over and over and over again. By the end of it, I'm like, man, maybe I do want a Bud Light. I don't even drink beer. So, I definitely commend South Korea just kind of saying, you know what, can you just get this out of my face? Like stop pushing this on me. It's harder to say no to something that is so prevalent.
Right.
And it's good that they are trying to take steps to say, you know what, businesses, there's other ways you can make money. You can save burn victims. You can,
Well, it's not South Korea that's saying this. It's some of the people, it's some of the population. It's tough because the government itself is on board for this. It's bringing in people. I mean, to give you a sense of this, they were actually talking about putting a clinic in the airport. Just because it's been such a big tourist trend, especially for those who are from China and Japan, they literally wanted to put a clinic inside a terminal at their airport. And the government was okay with this, but luckily it was denied later on. There was enough of a fight against it where they just decided, let's not go with this. But again, the government was like, oh, okay, well, maybe we should do this. This is, again, a good way of fostering more money, more people in the country. And I get it, right? You do ideally, as a country, as a government, want to foster the industries that are doing well, because ideally it brings more people in, it helps the economy out. In a perfect world, everyone sort of benefits. But this is the thing. Does South Korea really want to be known as the cosmetic surgery capital? Is this really something that it brings a positive light onto the country? So many countries want to be like, well, we want to be known for athletics and for health and for, and all that is great. But for cosmetic surgery specifically, like, okay, heart valve surgeries, sure. How to, handle and work with amputees or better technologies overall, that's great. But plastic surgery? I mean, is that something that's really benefiting your people? And I'm going to put some bias into this, especially for a business industry that's notorious for messing with our psyches, with our psychology of understanding who we are as individuals and being able to accept that. I don't know. I mean, I can't answer that for them. And evidently, from the way it sounds to a point, they do want to be known for that. But again, is that the right step? Personally, I don't think so.
Well, I think it depends, too, on what kind of cosmetic surgery, right? There's a lot of people out there who don't feel like their outside matches what they feel like on the inside. So there's a lot of surgeries out there that are available to help somebody express who they are on the inside, on the outside, such as surgeries for transgender reassignment or gender reassignment and things like that, or as I was mentioning before, burn victims, or somebody who may have a disfigurement that happened, due to birth, like a birth defect that they may want to fix, that will help improve their quality of life. So there is certainly, there's good in cosmetic surgery. What we're talking about here is the type of cosmetic surgery that is more pushed on people and forces people to have to look a certain way, and not necessarily, and telling them that they're not enough the way that they are, versus the type of cosmetic surgery that is to improve quality of life, or in whatever way that might be.
Absolutely. I mean, there are tons of soldiers who come back from the different occupations that we're currently doing, and they've become disfigured from explosions, shrapnel, from fires, you name it, and it can really change their life to get a piece of them kind of back through these surgeries. So there are definite positives, but it's all how you promote it. And from what we're seeing in the ads, they're not saying, hey, did you have a massive eye injury and you want to repair that? It's more so like, hey, your look is not acceptable enough. This is what's accepted, and this is what you should do. And that's where it becomes very, very difficult to support something like that, and especially from not only this industry, but from the government who's pushing it as well. And so, I mean, personally, I wish the best of luck to the people who are standing against this, and I think that's a huge win to push enough against the Metro for the Metro to take down the ads. That says a lot. And I think overall, that's another lesson we can learn too, is that if we voice our opinions enough and actually have solid facts behind them, not just any opinion. You could throw out any opinion. That happens all the time on the internet. But if you have actual facts and substance behind those opinions, you really can do a lot. Again, there might have to be more people involved. Sometimes it takes more than just one voice, but you can still have an impact. And I think that's a good way to go. And time will tell to see what actually happens in the next 5 to 10 years, whether this continues to grow, even if it's from people coming from other countries, or whether we see a slowing down of that and maybe a refocusing of either A, how they advertise and what they offer, or B, overall the kind of interest or acceptance of people.
And I have a question for you, actually, and all of the gents in our chat. And welcome everyone, by the way, those of you that have joined us. How are you guys doing today? But here's a question. We obviously see a lot of advertisements and targeting messaging towards women about how they should look, certainly in the Western culture. But for the men out there, what kind of visual or what kind of aesthetic do you get messaging for? Like, what is it that, you're supposed to be a certain kind of, what's this a certain kind of look that you feel marketing puts out there for men? What are some of the pressures that men face in terms of a visual aesthetic? And are there, I guess, is also the question.
Well, personally, I feel like the rugged look, right? The rough around the edges look is what's really pushed a lot of. And if you have more of a softer kind of look to your face, then it's considered more feminine, right? So, they try to push, stronger features, stronger jawline, stronger cheekbones even. There are several different factors, and it also depends on society, right? The expectations of men and how they look in India can be different to China, can be different to those of us in the US. So that even varies quite a bit too. But I think at least in the US, we always kind of get pushed that whole kind of rugged factor and that whole kind of manly man. You know, I just came out of my pickup truck and I just hauled a bunch of crap in the back of it and had a long day. And so I think that's pushed on a lot. I think in the sense too, having a certain muscle structure to your body also impacts that, which again you can sort of amplify through surgery and through using Botox. And there are cases where men have injected Botox and other things into their arms to make their muscles look like they're actually larger. Now clearly they are fake and you can easily tell so, but they're there, and people have done that because of that pressure of that specific look.
Interesting. That would explain why I mostly just see dudes at the gym trying to get that muscle.
Trying to get swole, bro.
Some of them look miserable though, and I kind of want to be like, it's okay. You don't have to do this if you don't want to. But I want to say that to all people who are always trying to look like something else, unless that's again something that you feel better represents who you are on the inside and you want to express that on the outside. By all means, go for it, you know. It's just, yeah, like, you know, at the same time, just make sure that you're not doing something because you think that's what you should be doing, because at the end of the day, you know, you are living with yourself the rest of your life, and you got to make sure that you make yourself happy first. Because the external things, other people's opinions, fashion, culture, you know, that can change and that can, you know, ebb and flow. What's important is, how do you feel? How does your body make you feel right now? Yeah.
Well, and Vargala makes a great point too. Just look at any men's health magazine, for instance. It's muscles on top of muscles, and even
muscles on top of muscles. And
even the guys in front of on the cover of those magazines, they get work done via Photoshop, just like the women do. Sometimes they'll add in a little tattoo that people don't have. Actually, Ryan Reynolds, when he was on the cover of one of these magazines several years back, they put a little tattoo on him.
Are you serious?
Oh yeah, and someone brought that up during a talk show, and they were like, "Hey, we didn't know you had any tattoos," and he's like, that's not a tattoo of mine. They legit just added it in. And so these things get added on to people even when they don't even know it. You don't even need cosmetic surgery. You just need to be good at Photoshop. And you'll see these changes being implemented onto people, whether they like it or not, whether they realize it or not. So yeah, the whole muscles on top of muscles, the rugged look, the tattoos, that gets pushed a lot. I don't think it gets pushed as much on men as it does women by any means, though. I think it's even harsher on women. I think it's more subtle for the men, where it's a lot more blatantly obvious with the women. Hey, did you know that your face looks like crap today? Maybe you should put on 5 layers of makeup, and maybe you should, you know, get a nose job, and maybe, you know, inject some Botox.
And also, have boobs and a butt, but also be super skinny at the same time. Like, wait, you want me to be fat, but you don't want me to be fat. What? Also, be short, but also be tall. Wait, I don't understand. So you want me to be shorter than the guy, but you want me to be tall enough like a model. Also have really long hair, but also have short pixie. I'm like, I feel like I'm just getting a lot of mixed messages, honestly, to some degree. But the one, the consistency of that message is kind of like you said. It's just that, like, whatever you're doing right now, you look like crap. You got to change it. And it's like, oh, okay. But then I feel like nowadays it's actually even more unclear which way to go, because, you know, Victoria's Secret has us believe one thing. But then fashion shows have us believe a completely different thing.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very confusing.
Well, yeah,
I don't know what I want to be.
You look at the Victoria's Secret ads, and it's like, okay, so I'm supposed to always be in a 2-piece and 6-pack abs or whatever. And then you look at the fashion shows, they're like, okay, so I'm supposed to dress like a chicken and walk in a straight line. Okay, go. Wait, what?
Also, be as thin as possible because the fashion industry does not have enough fabric to cover y'all. So I'm pretty sure that's why they do it, actually. You
Save
use
on
less fabric.
Oh, God.
You know what I mean? You have less to work with.
Yeah, actually, it's funny. So Coco Cover just said, me personally, I like bigger ladies, not the skinny ones. And of course, we also had Kiki Slider who mentioned too those thick Renaissance ladies. Yeah. Again, the changes in expectations, what people look like, always differentiate. Even now, they're so different in different countries, as I mentioned. For instance, there are tribes in Africa where men try to have the largest stomach. And then if they get the largest stomach, they actually kind of become the tribal leader of the group, because what that shows is that they're opulent enough to afford the food they need to feed themselves.
Oh, right. And that's why it used to be fashionable to be a little bit more larger back in the day, because it showed that you were able to provide. Exactly. So it was also why right now I feel like being tan is a fad. Like that's the thing that you want to go for, because it just shows that you have leisure time, that you can go and get tanned or go on the beach. But back in the old days, that was not the case, because it was the workers and the peasants that used to be out in the field and get their tan on. So ivory skin was prized because it meant that you were indoors and didn't have to do any work. So right, things change, from decade to decade, century to century. At the end of the day, just be as comfortable as you can with your own body. Obviously, changing things for health reasons, changing things for your own personal happiness level. That's one thing. But definitely, I would say, don't do it because of what you see in the magazines. Those are just like photoshopped to as AF.
As the hip kids are saying. Photoshopped AF. And, we have to also mention a question is, when is enough enough? And we love to hear from folks in chat to this very question is, what is too far when it comes to cosmetic surgery and the promotion of it? Honestly, I think it's already gone too far in the point of making people feel bad for not looking a specific way, for not conforming in a specific way, because you're psychologically impacting someone in a way that impacts them long term. And of course, these companies don't see or don't receive any sort of negative response from the government or from others in that industry, unfortunately, when it comes to this. Now, to a certain extent, of course, you can't lie in your marketing and say, well, if you don't get this type of surgery, you're going to die, or you will get the flu, or something stupid and random. Like, they can't do that, right? But they can mess with you and say, well, you just don't look good. And the court of law will say, well, I mean, that's an opinion, right? So they are allowed to say that. But it's like, but are they, though? Because is a company's opinion does it weigh more than anyone else on the street? Because I can look at a person on the street and go, well, fuck you, I don't care what you think about me. But at the same time, when it's coming from a company that's much bigger and I'm getting bombarded with it on ads and on commercials and in imagery all over the place, then it can get you to question, right? And make you go, oh, maybe what is wrong with me? And that's kind of a reconditioning. And they know what they're doing. And that's the whole point too. And the sad fact is they know what they're doing. They can't say that, oh, we're innocent, we didn't know that this would have a negative impact on people. Well, then why are you using it as a tool to get more sales? Again, just my 2 cents.
Yeah, businesses are notorious for using psychology to better their sales and screw the rest of us over. Not all companies, I should say. I mean, there are companies who are trying to do the good thing, but I feel like the bigger the company becomes, or the more competitive pressure they feel, they'll start to turn towards something that will make them a profit. And, on the one hand, I don't blame them, because every company's goal at the end of the day is to be profitable enough to stay in business, right? Because you want to continue on being in business. And it should be things like the government and other organizations who are there to protect the people, because Government works for the people. That's literally their job, which they do poorly in, I think, almost every country. Yeah. I think, how far is too far? I feel like if you're doing something that is more permanent than not, or more irreversible than not, and you're pushing people to do something like that, like that's taking it a step too far. Mm-hmm. To change one's face, like the bone structure and things like that, not that it's necessarily irreversible, but it's a kind of a permanent thing. It's not quite like changing my hair color or cutting it or getting a henna tattoo. That's more permanent. When you're changing bone structure and things like that, that's intense.
Well, and Kiki Slider mentions in chat today, he says, I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with promoting aesthetic ideal. We've done it in art for centuries, but advertising has definitely corrupted that notion. And that's absolutely on point. And we want to make sure not to confuse the fact of what we're saying. I think for instance, a company saying, hey, you're looking for that more V-line or that double eyelid or, well-rounded eyes, something, then you can achieve that here. That's one way of putting it, because what you're saying is, well, if you have this ideal, we can help you with that. That's fine. But absolutely, it's the notion of things getting corrupted by advertising by saying, no, it's not so much that if you want this, it's so much that you absolutely need it. And these are all the these are all the reasons why and how they negatively impact you, when that's not always the case, or usually not the case at all. So it's how the advertising is corrupting it, how the marketing is corrupting it to push further sales and to stay competitive within a specific industry.
And Mongo says that I'd say advertisers could be to blame in some instances, but at a point, it comes down to your common sense as a consumer. And I'm definitely agreeing with that statement. I do think that common sense, however, is ironically not so common. It also, when advertising feels like it's coming from an authority, right? Because look, it's somebody who had money enough to put it somewhere, right? It's something that you as a consumer can't do necessarily or don't have the means to. But even if you're hearing it from parents, if you're hearing it from other authority figures, your teachers, a boss, something like that, or somebody that you look up to, even a mentor, say, when it comes down, when those types of ideals come down from what you consider to be authority figures, then it does get a little harder, right? To sort of use the common sense, because you've got basically cognitive dissonance, right? Like, this person you trust, or this company, or the fact that it's an advertisement up on this giant billboard that everybody can see, or it's the government telling you something, or something like that, and you're like, that doesn't feel right, but I trust these people. It's much easier to just say, oh, well, I must be wrong. Okay, I'll fix me. It's fine. Because you don't hear all the other voices who are saying the same thing you are inside, right? Which is, wait, that's not right? Because no one is taking down the billboard. No one is telling your parents no, that kind of thing. So I 100% agree, common sense, yes, and trusting yourself and listening to yourself and listening to your gut. But there are circumstances where that might be more challenging to do. That's why it is so important when people speak out, when you hear more than one voice, when you add your voice to other voices, because then it becomes, oh, okay, it's not just me. There's nothing wrong with me. There's something wrong with that.
Exactly right. Even if, sharing your voice doesn't get an initial reaction from those perpetrating the acts that you're kind of going against or voicing your opinions against, at least it helps others realize there's another opinion out there. And that can be so important too. Sometimes in our minds, we get so caught up on the end goal that we forget that all the little steps forward to that end goal are also achievements that we are working to get toward. And we can't just take a major leap and go from A to Z. We have to hit all the steps in between. And so all of those are small wins, or small wins again in these battles to win the war sort of situation. And, you know, we've mentioned now about these large corporations and how it can impact an industry overall. Again, the focus on just making more money, bringing more money to investors, and also the impact on the people and how it can negatively impact the people. And our next topic hits that right on the head. Now, for many of you, because we're on Twitch, many of you have probably already heard that there was this huge rumor going around for several weeks now. And a lot of articles were covering it toward the end of January, beginning of February, about how Microsoft may consider acquiring EA, Valve, or PUBG Corporation, which is a subsidiary of the Korean company Bluehole. Now, what it seems is that an anonymous source close to Microsoft told Polygon that Microsoft is looking to purchase gaming giant EA. Now, this would be big in a sense, supposedly for Xbox, as they've been really bad at releases for specifically the Xbox, right? They were supposed to bring out Scalebound, they canceled that, Fable Legends as well. There's been this massive delay on Crackdown 3, and so they've been hurting. The or PlayStation overall, but the PS4 specifically, have had a ton of PS4 only games that have been huge successes, like Horizon Zero Dawn, for example. And so they said, well, it wouldn't be too far off if Microsoft did decide to buy EA. They did do this to the developer that created Minecraft, after all, back in 2014 for $2.5 billion. Billion with a B.
Billion with a B.
With a B. And then, of course, many believe that Microsoft has the money, but the acquisition just does not make any sense for EA. Many said, well, yeah, but the thing is that then they would have access to BioWare and to DICE games. And they have this Netflix for gaming style thing called Game Pass, where they feature all the Xbox One exclusive games on the day they release. So this would be huge if they had EA, because then they could push out all the BioWare games and the DICE games and what have you. And this would be huge for them. But again, most people are saying, nah, it just doesn't seem likely. EA is massive, and many economists are saying, well, it just doesn't make sense because of the fact that the amount of money they would have to spend to purchase EA and all of its subsidiaries, and all of its titles that they own, they would not really see a true return on investment. They said that, well, if back in the early 2000s when the first Xbox came out, if I have that right, but yeah, around 2001, when the Xbox launched, it would have made sense to then, at that point in time, buy out EA. They would have seen a strong return on investment, they would have time to build with it, and they would have seen huge benefits. But they didn't do it. And so with that, they just feel like it's not worth it for them, it's not worth it to their investors. But there's still some, rumors passing around that, well, maybe it's PUBG Corporation, for example, or maybe it's Valve. Valve still seems a little unlikely. PUBG Corporation, though, maybe not so much. The companies already have an established relationship because of the release of PUBG as a timed exclusive on the Xbox One last year. And again, PUBG is a massively played game, bringing in a ton, and I mean a ton, of money currently. And I mean, to give you a sense of how big PUBG is, last year alone, PUBG actually banned, I believe it was 1 million players for cheating. To think that a game could ban 1 million players and still be like, we're okay, yeah, we're doing just fine. But they banned 1 million players because they were using hacks, especially hacks that got them the different wearable cosmetic items in the game, or at least to work up enough in-game currency to gain those. And so, that's a massive buyout, and they could potentially do well with it, and they could build up the PUBG game platform even better than what it's on right now, because that's what a lot of people's complaints are, is the framework and the foundation PUBG is on ain't the best. And so, and with competitors like Fortnite out there, they could potentially consider a buyout. It's very much a reality. But are they? We don't know yet. We'll have to see about that. But as for the bigger topic, though, why is it so bad for these large corporations to buy out these game developers and these other corporations that are publishers that own all these game devs? Why is this negative? Now, most people will say, well, it's negative because they're shutting down all the damn game devs that they bought out in the first place, right? When you look at, for instance, the amount of game developers that EA has killed, it's massive. There are articles that say studios EA has killed, a history, and there's a full timeline.
Oh, good God.
I mean, you're looking at since for instance, companies that were out since 1987, like Bullfrog Productions, closed down. Westwood Studios, closed down. Origin Systems, gone. New FX, gone. Pandemic Studios, dead. Let's see here. What are some other ones? Playfish, gone. Black Box Games, dead. DreamWorks Interactive, gone.
Wow.
Phenomic Game Development, gone. Victory Games, gone. Mythic Entertainment, gone. Let's see here. What else? Maxis Software, and the list keeps going on and on and on and on. And they just keep killing off companies left and right. They'll buy them out. They'll go, you know what? Your game isn't going to bring us enough money because there's no loot boxes, there's no multiplayer. So, you know what? We're just going to get rid of you. We're going to consume you. We're going to take the bits and put it into other resources and maybe switch some people around and let everyone else go. Whatever. You look at Activision. Activision has done the same thing, especially since buying out Blizzard, where they became, Blizzard Activision or something like that. But you're looking at the Blast Furnace, gone. Gray Matter Interactive, gone. Infocom, gone. Luxoflux, dead. Shaba Games, goodbye. Red Octane, see you later. Underground Development, been nice knowing ya. Budcat Creations, gone. 7 Studios, dead. Bizarre Creations, dead. Neversoft, dead. And so many more. So this is one issue, right? Is that they keep just eating up everything and then going, well, this doesn't work, so then we're just going to get rid of you. And then people miss out on these games and what these original studios were bringing to the table. You're also, again, just as the people of South Korea are like, we don't want conformity. We're going to get conformity now in what we get for games. If you hate the fact of loot boxes, microtransactions, of games being rushed because investors want more money and so you have to deliver on the scheduled date that you said the release was going to be, guess what? It's going to continue to happen now because you have less competition, you have less people who can control what they're going to do and put out and release, and now those are going to be pushed out, and companies like EA, like Activision are going to say, what does it matter? We control basically the biggest portion of the pie anyway, so we could do whatever the hell we want. You have to buy from us. That favorite game of yours, we own it. That other favorite game, we now own it. That other favorite game, we canceled it. But here's another game that could replace it. Buy this one instead. So we're seeing a lot of that now. And outside of the cancellation of these different game developers, you're also getting a lot of other issues. For example, as we mentioned, microtransactions, but you're going to get these companies that are going to get arrogant. They're going to get really cocky, and they're going to promise the moon, the stars, the entire universe to their investors, which means that we could see even buggier games, even more incomplete games, and then they'll try to sell the fixes into DLCs.
Yeah, we screwed up. Now you're going to pay for the fix. What?
Exactly. Or we're going to get to the point where we're going to take a reliable series of games, we're going to release another one, get you so invested in the story, but it's going to be complete shite, this expansion, and then we're not going to do anything for a DLC because it didn't make us enough money. Like, for instance, Andromeda. So these things are going to constantly happen, even at a higher level because of this. You also have the fact that, when you look at this, it's not uncommon in other industries as well. And that's the scary thing, and that's the thing we need to look at from a larger perspective too. For instance, did you know that the beer industry has only 2 companies domestically that sell domestically that own 75% of the beer shares in the US? So 70% of the beer industry is owned by 2 companies domestically here in the US. That is insane. And if you start looking at other industries, you're going to notice this more and more. You know, gaming, beer, any type of entertainment, it's happening. And it's happening at a very scary rate. At such a scary rate that Vox actually came out with a fantastic article. I can't recommend this article enough to folks who should really read this to better understand what's going on. But it says that we are the closest in the US to an oligopoly than at any point in the past 100 years. An oligopoly means a few companies owning everything in a single industry. So it used to be back in the day, 1800s, early 1900s, where monopolies were the issue, where one company basically controlled everything, whether it was oil, whether it was steel, you name it, those issues were readily available. So in the 20th century, what they decided to do was do antitrust laws to implement, in order to implement it into our legal system to break up these monopolies. The problem with these, though, is the fact that they're only built to fight against monopolies. Our legal system is behind the times, and these systems that are currently in place, there is no right way of fighting an oligopoly. And so now we're seeing issues where the legal system doesn't know how to handle it. There's nothing really truly in place to fight against this. And yet we're seeing this in more and more industries.
Yeah, this is very similar. You know, I feel like if we're not careful, we're going to head down the path, or we're going to find ourselves in the coal towns of the early 1900s, right? Where you had the mining company set up an entire town. They build housing, they build the store, they own the restaurant, the saloon, everything, the brothel, and they hire miners to come live there, and then they pay them wages that then the miners go to the company store to spend, and they go to the company saloon to spend, and they, you know, pay rent to the company for their house. And really, at that point, the miners are not quite slaves, but they're just there for the mining company themselves, right? And I feel like the more and more of these companies merging into each other, we're talking like Amazon, Disney, Microsoft, Google, you know, the less marketplace competition that we have, eventually we're all just going to be slaves to the corporations. And there's a lot of, you know, science fiction stories and authors out there that write these stories where, you know, we sort of look at it and like, oh, the corporations are fighting amongst themselves. And it's like, but it's happening. It's happening right now. This is the beginning, right? It's slow, potentially. Doesn't feel slow, but, you know, it's a little slow. One company here, and all of a sudden over, you know, the past 2 or 3 decades, hundreds of smaller companies go out of business. Eventually we're going to get to the point where it's just going to be, you know, 2 or 3 major corporations owning everything. There's actually a company who owns a ton of brands, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, but is it Nestle or Johnson & Johnson?
Oh, I mean, Johnson & Johnson, Nestle both own an amazing amount of companies you'd be surprised in, and from all different industries.
Right, that's the crazy part.
Yeah, it's like you think Nestle, think water, but then, you know, they also own, you know, tons of other companies that have nothing to do with beverages or the consuming of specific edible goods. And it just blows your mind. Johnson & Johnson, the same thing. And, you know, it's kind of scary to go, well, wait a minute, though. Now, many people don't like a consumeristic society. I think consumerism to a point can be very beneficial because in the end, it is supposed to force companies to be more competitive, to try to vie for your attention in the right way and to follow specific practices, to push innovation. So because of competition, so that way, you know, there are better things being put out into this world, which means better quality, which means improvement on life overall, this kind of quality of life aspects that we want so badly. And that's what it's supposed to push. But if you're getting less and less people within a specific industry, you're not getting that innovation. What you're getting is, oh, you don't like it? Tough shit. That's what you have to deal with. You're not going to get competitive pricing. Because what'll happen is that people are going to go, well, we own everything, so we can do what we want. Or we'll introduce competitive pricing right now, but as soon as we become the one main source for said service for this industry, we're going to slowly start increasing our prices. Because now we control that. And who's going to say otherwise? That's scary. And that's very, very dangerous. Because, again, we are going to fall way behind. Especially for the U.S. as a country, we're going to fall way behind in innovation, way behind in being competitive in the international economy. And that's really going to hurt us. You know, I think we've been a little too cocky and arrogant for too long when it comes to this country and what we can do. We've already fallen behind in our infrastructure. We've already fallen behind in our healthcare. And education. I'm not ragging on the U.S. at all. I think it's a fantastic country, and I think some of the morals and principles are well-meaning. Absolutely. You know, I was born here. I have no complaints. I feel very fortunate. But at the same time, you know, you have to point out when things start not working, because we have to fix them. If we start going and saying, well, you're anti-patriotic and you don't like this country because you're saying there are things wrong with it, you're being in denial, and you're just digging everyone into a bigger hole. And it's ironic because these same people then complain about these certain issues. Oh, but America's great. America can be great. There can be great things about it, but there needs to be things that come into place to help fix it. There are many things, many industries that are sick, if you will, and they need a vaccination. And there needs to be things that needs to be cleared up. And, you know, the other issue too is, well, many will say, well, what is the legal system doing? Why isn't the legal system coming in to say, whoa, these companies, this can't happen? Well, there's two main reasons that this Vox article points out, and in many respects, I agree. One is the fact that we're to blame. You know, we see this, and many of us continue to buy the same stuff from these companies after they merge. So they look at it and go, well, people are buying stuff. All the numbers say this was a successful thing to do. So evidently we can merge and we can keep buying out companies because we're getting the support financially from these people. You know, again, we have to remember that businesses, even though they're ran by people, in the end, you get that business brain going. It's all about numbers. That whole concept of emotions, unless it has to do with emotional marketing, get thrown out the window. It is all about numbers.
Right. Well, businesses have to stay in business.
Right. Exactly. And so you have to hit them where it hurts, which is the wallet. You stop paying for things. You stop buying from that company. They're going to stop doing what they're doing, many of their practices, or at least supposedly try, like EA was saying they were supposedly trying. Now, the other thing to think about, too, is the fact that with the economy, there are many economists who believe that there's no such thing as a good or evil in the economy or business. What they believe is that the sense of morals should stay out of it, because something that could be considered evil or bad could actually be very beneficial to the economy, thus be very beneficial to the people overall, to the society. So they said, well, you know, keep that morality out of it. Whereas the legal system goes, well, no, we still feel like you should be able to do business while following specific virtues that do not cross the line of being considered evil or bad. So there's a constant fight back and forth between the legal system and between economists going, well, you know, do we consider this bad or not? And unfortunately, a lot of times these specific economists tend to win because money tends to play a big part in it, right? You know, you say, well, look how much money we're making. Look how much money can be going into the legal system and into the government overall, into funding for projects that you all want to do. And look at how much money we can now invest into your next campaign run. That all then influences these battles. And so then the legal system kind of goes, well, I mean, I guess, how can you morally say that a merger is bad, right? I mean, this company hasn't really shown themselves to be predatory. And it looks like from this merger that the customers will benefit, right? I mean, they'll be able to expand their services. They'll be able to help more people. So, I mean, we can't really say it's bad or not, right?
Oh, yeah. The short-term benefits, they're so great. Can I get that paper back and just put it right over my head? It's cool. This is fine. That's sarcasm for anybody who's listening. If you can't see our faces as we say this. Well, and what the other thing that they're not considering is how this also affects the employees as well, right? All of, there's so many people who are, like in Silicon Valley, right? I feel like the goal is to create a company really fast, make it really profitable, and then sell it to the highest bidder, right? Like as if that's some sort of a wonderful achievement. But then you're looking at the fact that, great, so now one company is going to own 100 smaller companies. They're going to probably lay off people. They're not going to worry about attracting top talent in the future because they're going to be the only company who hires, let's say, game developers, right? And so they're going to cut wages, they're going to cut benefits, and then the employees are going to suffer too. Sure, the short-term benefit of getting, a few $1 million for your company may sound fantastic, and the short-term benefit of, oh yeah, with Amazon Prime, I can get my items in less than 2 days, free shipping, everything is super cheap. But the Amazon Prime cost did go up recently, and the more and more companies that are going to be bought out by these major, these other bigger companies, you're going to not only have what we were talking before, which is just kind of a homogenous products and offerings and services, but you're also going to get, if they're the only ones that are providing that later, they're going to up the prices, and then you won't have anywhere else to go. So there's a lot of things that long term the government should be looking at. Our legal system, all of these organizations and entities that are in place for our benefits, specifically for our protection, they need to step up and do their job already. And if they can't and they don't want to, then let's vote some other people into politics. Anyways.
Well, and I feel like too, politicians look at numbers as well, right? They look at sales and they go, well, people are still buying stuff. And again, it comes back onto us, right? We're not voicing our opinions enough, especially with our money. And the other factor is that a lot of us, not all, but a lot of us tend to pick or choose what we really want to support, right? So for instance, if we hear that Comcast is doing another merger, we go, whoa. Comcast, spawn of the devil? Nope. Fight against this merger. Here are a ton of petitions. Please go against this. But when we hear Google does another merger and takes over another tech company or another app company or whatever, there are many people who love Google and go, oh, well, I mean, this is good, right? Because Google could expand what they offer now, and there's so many different benefits. Instead of going, whoa, wait, they're taking away competition. They're going to end up just swallowing up this company and then disbanding it and taking all the resources, and I'm left without an app or a good or whatever, which is what we were talking about in the first place when it came to these game companies, where these publishers like EA or Activision would buy out these developers and then eat them whole, basically swallow them and throw away the bones and leave nothing left, right? They consumed them as much as possible, and now these game developers are gone.
But Evan, my email has been free from Google for like ages. I don't see anything bad about it. Oh, you mean like there's ads now and they have access to all my information? That's okay, though. It's still free for me, and it's been so long.
And what's really information and privacy, right?
Right.
Even though these same people want net neutrality, and they also don't want our politicians selling our browsing history, which is now legal. Most people don't realize this.
Holy shit, are you serious?
Oh yeah, over 6 months ago or so, I can't remember now. It was like 6 months to a year ago now.
Crap.
They passed a bill that went, okay, this is now allowed. We can actually take your history and sell it to the highest bidder. Actually, one of the founders of Cards Against Humanity tweeted out, I swear to God, if they pass this, I am going to buy all of the politicians' browsing history and I will put it out publicly.
He'll make a card game out of it.
And probably make a card game out of it. Now, whether they actually did that or not, I'm not sure. I haven't heard anything on it. But again, I appreciate at least the sentiment of someone saying that, though it actually happening. Again, actions speak louder than words. Where's their browsing history? I want to know what some of these people are doing. That's all I'm saying.
Also, incognito mode does not not save that stuff. Just letting it out there. Just saying it.
It does not save you.
Be careful where you go and from what device.
That's right. If you think that you can get away with on a work computer using incognito mode to view whatever website you want, no, my friend. It just does not save it in your history. That does not mean it cannot be traced. Yes. And yes, absolutely. RX Mongo says Google uses all the history for tailored ads. So yeah, just like with Facebook too, ain't nothing free, folks. They're getting something. Information is becoming one of the largest monetary units, if you will, than anything else. That data, it's all about data. Data science jobs and everything else are skyrocketing, going through the roof right now because they realize how much access they can get from us through technology. And I'm not trying to sound conspiratorial or anything like, hey, put a tinfoil hat on me. It's just the truth. That is just what is actually happening, is the business way of doing things. And it can be very intimidating if your name is attached to everything and now you're getting pushed upon by all these advertisers. So, but to get back onto the point of this topic, though, of the negative impact of businesses swallowing it up, all these small competitors, again, we're getting less competition. Prices are going to start rising and going through the roof because they control it all. They don't have any competition. Employees' wages will decrease because they'll go, well, who are you going to work for? We're basically it. There's no competition. So either you stay and get paid basically nothing, or you leave and become unemployed or work for another industry. We don't care. And that's what's going to happen. And that's one of the reasons why we've seen a stagnation in wages in the U.S. For the past 20 years. We're not getting paid too far off from our parents and grandparents back in the 1950s and 60s and 70s. There's not been any major increases. Maybe 10 cents here, 5 cents there. But you tell my landlord that, I'm sorry, but I don't get paid enough. They don't care. They don't care. Oh, well, you got a boost in 10 cents. That means that you can pay your rent, right? That means that I can actually charge you more for your rent because you're getting that 10 cents extra per hour, right? No. That's not how it works out. So it impacts everyone, not even just from a consumer standpoint, but from an employee standpoint. And I think it's great that many of these individuals in the gaming company go, AAA is not the way to go anymore. It is not the way to go, and that we need to start creating our own businesses. And I give props, even though the game Lawbreakers kind of went under in a way, and didn't see or didn't meet the expectations and the hype being brought on. The fact that the guy went into it and said, hey, we're going to create a company, we're going to create a game for hardcore gamers, and it's going to be, fairly affordable, and it's going to give you everything you need. Much props to him and for going against the AAA companies. So, and we're seeing more of that now, right? We're seeing even more of that, but again, anything can happen. And again, we could see one of these massive mergers where Microsoft buys out someone, or Amazon or Google buys out another company. I mean, we're on Twitch. It is a platform owned by Google. And again, I don't think mergers are a bad thing, but I think you can go too far in an industry or spread yourself out among too many industries. And that's where there's a thin line, and we have to be careful of that. So, and I'd love to get your thoughts also in chat too about this. But yeah, Twitch is owned by Amazon. So, I mean, again, we say certain things. We're not saying Amazon is a horrible company. Not at all. We're not saying Twitch is a horrible company. Not at all. But we're saying that, again, these companies need to start looking at reality. Long-term wise, based on a consumeristic society, there's no competitiveness. There's no innovation. So what's going to happen? Eventually things are going to start kind of curtailing downward. And then what can you do? Nothing, because you're the only company in business. So we say this not of like pure hatred, but also as a kind of, like be careful to these companies, like watch out, caution, don't push yourselves. You're looking at numbers right now, but it is going to negatively impact you.
Right. I mean, and all we're trying to say with any of our topics as well is just don't bury your head in the sand. If you see something and it feels off, find out ways to fight against it or to educate yourself and others on it, and not just okay, all these business mergers are happening, somewhere in the netherworld of business, I'll see what happens. It's like, check and see what your local politicians are doing about it. How do they feel about it? Vote for the people that believe in what you believe in, and help them make the change, And there's a lot of times where we say, if we all had all of the hundreds of extra hours in a day, sure, yeah, we could run for politics and make change happen in the world. But that's not the point, right? The point is to put our trust in the people that deserve our trust, and put our money in the companies that deserve our money, and really be a little bit more active as best as we can with making the choices to support the things and the people that are making the right choices and that are supporting the right things. And if something is happening where it doesn't feel like it's right, or you see it going down a path that maybe won't have a good effect, spread the word. Get some people involved, sign the petition that you come across, and as best as you can, try to be a little bit more involved in your day-to-day life, because the choices that you make today affect the choices that you'll have tomorrow, in a broad sense, essentially.
Yeah, and as Mongo says in chat, competition inspires innovation. Take away the competition and you get repetitive. There is no innovation. Where do you go next? And how do you stay competitive in an international setting as well? And that's what I feel like many of these businesses don't realize, is that, again, folks, we are international. I mean, we have become so well connected, and we have become an international economy due to technology, for example, and just the growth of industries and trade, that we have to remember that, okay, so great, you own every company, let's say in the US, but there are still other countries. And I'm not saying to buy out those businesses too in those countries, but again, that, you have to think on a global scale. And so you could try to do a whole world takeover if you want of the gaming industry, but it's not going to be beneficial in the long run. It really won't. And so whether it is an EA, or whether it is an Ubisoft, or whether it is, many of these other companies, even Microsoft, as they are technically a publisher and a developer as well, both 2 in 1, we've got to let them know this cannot continue on. You've got to be careful, not push it. You're getting a little too cocky. And, we've seen it too. We've seen some of this uprising in Battlefront 2 when that came out. EA tries to put in microtransactions. Everyone lashes back at them. They pull it back. But then they said, well, this isn't permanent. We're going to eventually reintroduce them. And it's stopped them from making sales. It's really hurt them to the point where they've had massive sales on Battlefront 2 and have made it super cheap so that way they can get players. But people don't want to buy it. And I think some people are starting to wake up to it, which is great. But that needs to continue to happen. So the next EA game that comes out, even if it's not a Star Wars game, that means you do not buy it. Because that doesn't make sense, right? You don't say, well, I'm not going to buy Battlefront 2 because, it's Star Wars, even though EA owns everything. But I will buy this other EA game. What's the point then? What was that action for? You might as well just buy Battlefront 2 at that point, too. So it's all about, basically showing your power with your wallet. Don't buy games. Eventually, maybe things will change. There's going to be some backlash. There's going to be some people saying, well, we'll temporarily do it. All right, you could temporarily do it all the hell you want. That doesn't mean I'm coming back, though.
Well, we live in a society, too, I think, that, encourages and has a lot of instant gratification and short-term gratification. So it is hard sometimes to see long-term how some of your choices can affect something in a bad way, right? Because, for the most part, we can theorize about what might happen a few years down the path. But what's important right now is, well, I want my thing right now, right? Or I want it tomorrow, or I want it in the next week. And it is hard to think about how your short-term choices can affect your long-term choices. And that's something that I certainly struggle with every single day. And we as a society, I think, struggle with as well. So, yeah, it's just important to, just be more mindful of what you do.
Exactly.
And how you do it.
Exactly right. Again, you have a lot more power than you realize. And, with that, we're going to wrap up the show here. We have hit on so many amazing topics, and thank you to everyone in chat who has shared their, some awesome perspectives, whether it's from overall expectations of how we're supposed to look in cosmetic surgery to, how businesses should be ran and how our economy should be ran, and what should be our focuses to science. What these cells and do they induce anxiety into our brains? How can we control them? What is too far, for example? And so it has been an awesome time. We're so happy again to be back after the 2-week hiatus. So we thank you so very, very, very much for joining us today, for hanging out with us on Twitch, or if it's on Monday and you're listening to us via podcast, thank you so much for joining us either on Podbean or on iTunes. We greatly appreciate it. It's awesome to have you. And if there are topics that you want to hear more about, or questions that you have, or comments about specific topics, and you want to share some of your thoughts and beliefs, please make sure to connect with us. You can either visit us at mindminepod.com and go to our contact form section and send us an email. Otherwise, you can reach us at Instagram or Twitter, which is at MindMine TV. And you can reach us there, and again, comment, tweet at us, whatever, and just let us know some things that you want to hear or some things that you appreciated, and we'll make sure that those are being put into future episodes. Again, our goal is to make sure that we're putting out content that you want to learn and hear more about, that impacts your life directly. So let us know some of your thoughts, let us know some of the topics that you would love, as we want to make sure to bring those to you. So with that, thank you all so very much. We greatly appreciate every single one of you joining us today. I know there are so many channels on Twitch, and you've come here, so we really do understand that and appreciate that. So thank you beyond words. Thank you so very much for that. And for you listening via podcast, thank you as well. We hope you've enjoyed these past 2 hours with this discussion, and we look forward to many more with you in the future. So until then, make sure, again, we do game streams as well. So if you love Twitch and you love video games, make sure to join us on Thursday, as Thursday is always Wars Day, where we play Warframe or World of Warcraft. Tomorrow it'll probably be Warframe, because we've been loving that game. And then also on Friday, Fighting Fridays, we are doing Doom. So if you've never played the game that was released, the latest game released by Bethesda, make sure to join us. It is a gory, visual, spectacular piece of game right there. So make sure to join us for that. And on Sundays, we do Single Player Sundays, where we're taking on Final Fantasy IX. So if you want to trip down memory lane, Sunday is the day to come back and join us, kick back, and have some fun. So until then, thank you all very much. Have an awesome week.